Welcome back to D&D Beyond. I am Amy Dallen, and I am thrilled to be joined today by two very excellent guests for a Dragons Deep Dive. We want to keep talking all about the good stuff we know is coming in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which was recently announced, and you can pre-order right now on dndbeyond.com. I'm just saying. Please welcome back to the stream the excellent Riley Silverman. How you doing today?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, and especially happy to be making this intro because I've gotten to roll dice with him. I have learned so much from his Twitter feed and his general expertise and his deep love for and knowledge of role-playing games. Please welcome Teos Abadía to the stream. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. You are great, Amy. Thanks, it's a pleasure. And D&D Beyond, love the tool. I could go on for a long time, but I'll just be quiet now.
I will never stop you. Look, nothing is easier than to be excited about dndbeyond.com because we all know I was using it for years before that was more professionally relevant. It's just very helpful. But this has been an unforced commercial from me for D&D Beyond. You all know what stream you're on, and you're here on purpose, and you're here to hear about some dragons. So, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons is coming our way. It is going to contain over 20 different kinds of dragons. There are new categories. The gem dragons are coming at us in 5th edition. We have new player options. We have new DM options. We have new lore. So before we get into those things, first, what about this, if anything, one element or one overall thing is most exciting, Riley, for you in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons?
I think for me, I really like the idea they're introducing of dragons, having their layers, having effect on regions, they're an essential part of the world as a 5th edition concept. I'm really, really into that. Just so that whole idea of the layer effects on a region also tied into the idea of these great worm dragons that are godlike beings. Because I'm a big fan of the way that gods work in Theros. And I think it's really hard necessarily to replicate that with the pantheon of D&D gods because there's so many across so many different pantheons. So I feel like using these great worm-style dragons, I think you can kind of recreate a lot of that really fun, godlike, mythical flavor. And I think it also really help. One of the things that I often hear people talk about with D&D is that when you get to higher and higher levels, it's so hard as a DM to make challenges that your players actually feel threatened or higher stakes by because the higher levels. I mean, I killed a dragon once in a one shot. I one-shotted a dragon as a fighter at level 12 one time. So I think that having dragons that maybe are maybe last a few rounds longer in combat and actually feel like a legitimate threat with worldly implications is really exciting. So that's the big thing. And then my smaller thing I'm excited about is more dragon turtle stuff. I love dragon turtles and I want to see more of them. So that's what I'll say for now, and I'll put a pin for later.
The turtle great worm, which you can see right now in this unbelievably, meltingly beautiful art that we have already to preview this. I definitely want to keep going, but Riley, I gotta ask, for folks who are watching, because I know not everybody has Mythic Odysseys of Theros, right? Not everybody's familiar with that side of Magic the Gathering. Can you tell us a little bit about that for folks who might be not the whole book, but the element you're drawing on here for the mythic elements?
Sure. So Theros is based in Greek mythology. So as opposed to being medieval sword and sorcery, it's more like sandals and swords play type, fantasy. And so the way that when you read Greek myths, the way that Greek gods just exist in the world and interact with mortals and mess with them all the time and are just kind of these big celebrity moody teenagers that are messing with the world all the time and have these very heightened passions and things like that. And so it's
Petty jerks
when you watch,
confirmed.
Yeah, exactly. It's mythical petty jerks, and I think it's a really interesting dynamic for gods because normally in D&D campaigns, gods are kind of these distant, ethereal concepts. You know, when you get like in Wildmount, they're literally established as being behind a gate and they can't enter the mortal plane. And also, when you're in the physical realm of the Forgotten Realms, they're kind of above what's happening while you're doing things. Whereas in Theros, they're walking around and like you can go talk to them and they can mess with you and stuff like that. And it really brings that Greek mythical flavor to it. And so I feel like this is a cool way of having that same kind of flavor in a Forgotten Realms or other physical realm material plane campaign. So I'm excited about that.
Heck yes. And in addition to those themes, I believe, and we can get into this later, but there are things called mythic actions that came with, like, that was introduced in Mythic Odysseys of Theros that's going to play into dragon categories in a really interesting way. But, Teos, if you had to pick something about this or the whole thing or an element that is most exciting, what would you go with?
It's tough. And I agree. Those sort of encounter building tools and layer aspects, that's a big part of it. You know, I love the old books that had these like super cool layers, right? Like just really neat, like what a black dragon layer looks like. That's the kind of creative thing that, as Riley was saying, you know, you don't want to just have like a dragon in a room and everybody beats up on it and destroys it in one round. You want this to be a big epic battle, and what their ecology, their layer setup looks like. That's fascinating stuff. I'm super into that. I also think it's really interesting to see about this dragon personality traits. And this ties into the lore aspects they're bringing in. But like, if you look at recent books, they've done a great job of world building where they speak to how a DM wants to use aspects of monsters or realms into their world and making it really interesting. And so I could see that they might take some of the like Van Richten's approach and create really interesting dragon personality traits that fill DMs with ideas and make for really cool encounters. That's exciting.
Heck yes. I think I already declared my favorite last week, but I'm going to update it slightly because we can now talk about the fact that the writers on Fizban's Treasury of Dragons include both the project lead on this is James Wyatt, who has a long history with dragons and wizards of various kinds, but also that please show this off. Can you tell us briefly what this is?
Yeah, so this is the third edition Draconomicon. There was a second edition one too. And the third edition one is Andy Collins, Skip Williams, and James Wyatt. So Wyatt knows it well. There was also one for 4E, which was also really cool. It came in two different books, one for the metallic and one for the chromatics. Lots of fun. And they even had, for like the non-gamer, things like this in stores. And it's just like not stats, but like pictures and lore, and it's made by Wizards of the Coast, and it's really cool.
That reminds me of Brian Froud's Book of Goblins that you can buy. That's like all the work the Frouds did for Labyrinth, and it's all the different types of goblins and stuff. That's awesome.
That's fantastic. And I do love like the variety products where sometimes you want something that's full of numbers and rules and things, and sometimes you want like the Young Adventurers guides that are just like, here's the deal, fall in love with this. I love that whole history of trying different approaches to this material. But alongside James Wyatt on this one, I am just cards on the table, extremely biased. She's a friend of mine. I have known her for years. She is thoroughly delightful. Amy Vorpahl is on board this book, writing dialogue for Fizban the Fabulous. And that is a match made in heaven. I loved hearing them talk about it on D&D Live this weekend and talking about the ways that fit made sense. And I really loved what James Wyatt had to say about Fizban, which is that they've had these snarky narrators who I love dearly, but what makes Fizban a little different is that he's warm, that he's fundamentally kind. Which I think I'm directly quoting because it was my favorite thing. Because, yes, I want to grow up to be Fizban the Fabulous, and I realize there are several things that make that difficult, but, you know, don't take my dream away from me. It could happen.
I believe in you.
So, in terms of, and we will circle back around to lots of this stuff as we go, but in terms of the actual dragons, which is, of course, a whole lot of what we're getting in this book. It is Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. First thoughts, Teos, on the actual stuff we're getting for the dragons in this book. Is there one that sounds most exciting or an element you're happy to see coming back in?
Well, I imagine they're never telling us everything. And so I want to start first with my hope, because if it's not true, I hope it's coming later. And what I love, my favorite dragons were the catastrophic dragons that came in fourth edition. And there's this awesome lore about how they turn against dragonkind and side with the primordials. And as a result, they sort of exude these cataclysmic effects like giving off fire and typhoons and things like that. I would love to see those come back. They probably won't. I do know we're getting great worms, and that's always neat because I love high CR creatures. I love being able to challenge high level characters with really cool monsters. So seeing what they do with the mythic effects from Theros, how they bring that into great worms, that'll be super cool. With gem dragons, I can't help but wonder what this portends, right? Because psionics is the gem dragons. That's what they tend to use when they breathe, when they do various effects. And they have a very interesting history of having their own god that isn't Tiamat or Bahamut. And I can't help but wonder what we're doing with all these psionics. Where are we going in the future? And that just makes my head spin, gets me really excited.
And of course, Sardior was mentioned in the stat block that they released for the Sapphire Dragon. We know we're getting a revised Sapphire Dragon in this book, but there's really no reason that it couldn't involve a whole lot of lore for Sardior and what that means. The unique Ruby Dragon? Have I got that? Am I remembering right? Very excited for that. Riley, the dragons themselves, anything jump out at you?
I kind of touched on it earlier. I'm just so excited to get a range of dragon turtles. Dragon turtles are my favorite dragons. They're just so fun to run as a DM. It's very, I already mentioned my love of the Frauds and Labyrinth earlier, and there's something very Jim Henson-y about like a dragon turtle. Like whenever I've played as a DM,
terrifying way.
Yeah, I love running. Like I've run a session where people are on an island, they don't know it's a dragon turtle, and that's like the mystery of the island is like why the tides change is because it's a turtle going up and down in the water and having to talk to the island they're on. And it's just so fun. And so the idea of having a variety of different kinds of dragon turtles that I can mess with and play with is just really delightful for me. So I think out of all of them, I'm excited to see about these gem dragons. I like the idea of kind of the way the dragons spread out. But if you're asking me a specific type of dragon, I'm excited to see way more of. It's more dragon turtles. That's it. That's my answer. TURTLE power.
Choice.
Let's go for it.
Turtle power. I'm so glad that happens to be your favorite, because that means I won't have to spend as much time working them into the conversation during this stream. Because the minute I saw that art, I was just like, "What? This is amazing!" So we do know, for folks who might not have caught some of what's out there, we can talk about the fact that the Great Worms, if that doesn't sound familiar, that's okay. It is going to be for our Dragon Mythos in the 5th edition. It's a new category, and they've described it beautifully as when dragons, because they are connected innately to the material plane, because they were involved in its creation, and that's both justifies why their layers might affect the area around them, as you alluded to earlier, and it means that as they grow, they have the potential to make contact with other versions of themselves, essentially, on different planes. Now, this is one of the ways that the many worlds of D&D can sort of potentially, if you want them to in your game, start to touch and overlap. And when those dragons contact and potentially merge with each other, you get hyper, ultra, mega powerful dragons, which is not the technical term, but they could use it. I mean, I'm giving it to you if you want it, wizards, for these great worms, which are going to be just tremendously powerful and impressive using some of those mechanics. And I'm just very excited for all of that. Among the new player options. Yeah. No, continue.
Can I just say, I'm fascinated by that whole cosmology and history angle, because the Forgotten Realms is maybe deliberately sort of muddy on exactly how dragons started up. And so this whole first world aspect and how other worlds are a reflection of it, and what does this mean, and the epic tales of primordials and gods and the origin of dragons and giants. I would love more info on that. I will eat it up, just scoop it up with a spoon. And I'm really excited, if I could dream big, that this is going to take us somewhere that maybe it's a hint to a future with some super epic adventure where we would have to go back to the first world and sort of deal with those echoes. That would be amazing.
Well, You're saying deal with some first world problems?
I see what you did there. And I
Yeah.
like it.
That's fantastic. You can't tell D&D players this world existed at some time and us not want to be like, I'm buying a ticket. How do I go to there? I
Yeah.
feel like they know that, right? They know that. Riley, thoughts on these?
I would say that I think my excitement is, like you said, the combination of like James Wyatt and Amy Vorpal, and also like you talking about like older books and the different editions of the Draconomicon and stuff like that. I think what's fascinating for me about this book and what I'm excited about is that I am someone who has a long history of TTRPGs, but I didn't truly get invested in D&D until 5th edition, so I consider myself a newer expert of the game. And I also think there's a lot of people, I think this game is obviously, this isn't even I think, it's a fact, the popularity of D&D has massively exploded with 5th edition, and so there are a lot of people that are pretty diehard players now who don't have these older books and this older lore. And so it's this great way to give this lore a facelift that brings it into 5th edition and helps newer players have a way to fill in this gap in their lore, while also giving these really fun updates to the lore to players like yourself who have been playing for a long time and are already hoarding dragon love and dragon knowledge, but now you're like, cool, here's a new way to enjoy dragons in this version of the game. And so I think the combination of James Wyatt, who is like the expert in dragons for the company, and Amy Vorpal, who I think you can say is a true ambassador of the game and really helps to, like, I think Amy is really passionate about sharing the game with new players and getting people excited about it and making D&D part of what's so fun about it now. I think that's a great combination of people that are working on a book like this.
Absolutely agreed. And I'm so glad that you said that, because I do geek out on the long history, but I also love the fact that you don't need it. You don't need to have that stuff to play and enjoy the game. It's just amazing stuff that's available if you fall all the way down the rabbit hole. Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome.
And that's what's wonderful about a product like this, right? It wraps it all together into one tome, so you can just be filled with all these ideas about what dragons can offer to your game. And the more that it ties into that old history, and however it chooses to do it through the new 5e lens, that creates a new touch point for all these new fans. It's great.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. As you are digging into that resource, you also, in addition to all this great information about the world and the dragons that you might meet and fight or be friends with or hang out with, or I'm not going to tell you what to do in your games, you also have some new player options in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. So we are getting 2 new subclasses, which will sound familiar to folks who might have played with some of the playtest material earlier this year, late last fall, I've forgotten now. But new subclasses for Ranger and Monk, the Drake Warden Ranger and the Way of the Ascendant Dragon. Oh, I forgot to write it down. For the
That's
Monk.
right.
Yeah. Those are both coming at us in final forms. It's such a natural title. I assumed I was getting it wrong. Along with some new feats, some new spells, and of course, some new Dragonborn updates. With the gem dragons coming in for the first time, we're getting updates there, and I think, and in theory, we're getting some updates to other Dragonborn materials. So that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of options. In addition to that, we learned that they are going to give you a table where if you want your other kind of character to tie into dragons, you can do that with some creative suggestions that they're going to include in this book, which are already very tasty and exciting. So Riley, among the player options, is there something that you're most excited to get your hands on?
You just touched on it. I think that table is what I'm most excited about. I think that because I like all these other things, but yeah, there are so many fun ways to bring other subclasses in. And I think one of my big passions in D&D is customizing subclasses in flavor to fit your character idea that you have. And I also love that, like, I haven't seen a lot of mentions in the materials about the dragon-blooded sorcerer. And so I'm really curious to see if that table will include ways to make your sorcerer be of a gem dragon descent instead of being from, a chromatic or metallic dragon. Will your sorcerer be able to be how about a turtle that's a turtle dragon descendant? I don't know. But I really like that idea about
Speaking my language.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the idea of this table that it helps you give you suggestions for how to flavor your subclass character, even if there's not like an official documented class that is like, these are all the benefits you get. Like, I think you can do so much with flavor, and I love when they help inspire that creativity in players. So I'm really excited. Also, I briefly mentioned that I love the idea of the Moonstone Dragon, which is the Feywild specific dragons. So I want to see how that plays out with these Fey, Archfey warlocks that have a patron that is a Moonstone dragon. So that's my excitement for that. I think the customization and the focus on letting players really dig into these characters is really exciting for me.
Heck
It's
yeah.
worth
Teos,
noting that
anything
we
jump out?
have. Yeah, worth noting that we have already a fairy dragon in normal size and ginormous size due to one of the layers of Undermountain. So DMs who want to throw a 2-size dragon already have a great option for a fairy dragon surprise, which I think that makes its own adventure. I think any DM, you give those two things to them, small and giant sized fairy dragon, and you can just have fun with that.
Absolutely.
But I am curious about the magic items, because one thing I like doing is making a Dragon's Hoard special and have items in it that the players really remember. It came from this Dragon's Hoard, right? Like a Dragon's Hoard should be neat. It should be salient and register for the rest of the campaign. So some neat sort of magic items that players can get their hands on that would feel really tied to that lore, that can make a campaign go a long way in terms of being memorable.
Heck yeah. Is there anything from among the playtest options, like a spell you're really hoping makes it, or a feat that you think is particularly cool?
I wonder if we'll get something that reflects Fizban, because Fizban, the namesake of this tome, is from Dragonlance and is sort of like a bumbling old fool, but also powerful and an avatar of a god. And Fizban does things like cast Featherfall, and instead of causing the person to gently float down, summons by mistake a whole bunch of feathers that make like a feathery bed that slow you down. And so I'm curious whether we'll get any Fizban magic, because that sort of weird, not what you expect magic would be right up my alley.
His own little wild magic table, but just of like adorable Amelia Bedelia-esque surprises. Once again, I want to grow up to be Fizban. If I can just make that happen, please. And I do apologize. It's impossible. It's impossible to talk about this without dropping some extremely old but still technically large spoilers about Fizban and Dragonlance. So very sorry to everyone. It's just you'll still enjoy them, and I hope everyone is looking forward to it. We're getting classic Dragonlance novels, I think, coming out at some point in the future. But I love, please keep flying the dragons in from every side. She's beautiful. We did have a question from a cup of squids that I think we've somewhat covered. Do we have... the show and tell portion is the best portion. Do we have a rough idea of how many of these new dragons are drawing from older D&D editions versus how many are new creations for 5e, asks a cup of squids. And I would say we can't talk about that fully yet, although we do know, like, we can account for updates to a lot of things that we're expecting. We know gem dragons are coming in. We know a little bit, like, they've listed the official types. But we know there's also some surprises, like Moonstone dragons. So I would say, leaving room for some surprises, I would say expect mostly an update, the introduction of the gems, and then probably some stuff we're just not going to see coming.
And we did have, it said, stats for deep dragons, dragonborn champions, humanoid dragon servitors, and dragon adjacent creatures. And I can't help but think, shouldn't there be some draconians in there? But we'll have to see.